starting with we are starting with the question, the terms restricted and elaborated codes. These were introduced by Basil Bernstein. Now, I want you to explain who, when was it proposed, and what work did he include this study in. So basically, um, so there was something called I don't recall exactly, so class related codes or something like that, so very related. There was some work done by Basil Bernstein, mention the year, what these two really are. I mean, not don't go into too much into explaining too much about what the restricted and elaborated code are, because I know that elaborated code is used in formal settings. It is very explicit, and it does not require the listener to be reading between the lines. Whereas in the restricted code, it focuses on maybe in group conversation, for example. That form of communication does use the restricted code. So restricted and elaborate code, don't elaborate them. Just give me the new about the.
Basil Bernstein introduced the concepts of restricted and elaborated codes in the context of language and social class. He proposed these ideas in the late 1960s as part of his sociolinguistic work on language and education. The concepts were central to his theory of sociolinguistic codes, which he explored in his book titled Class, Codes, and Control. Bernstein argued that the way people use language is influenced by their social class. Restricted codes are often associated with working class speakers, while elaborated codes are more common among middle class speakers. His work emphasized the impact of language on education and social mobility, suggesting that differences in language use could contribute to social inequalities. Does that cover what you were looking for?
All right, now let's move on to the next question. The next question is it has two assertions. The first, that language is a strong marker of identity. Second, that the forms of language variation serve to identify people belonging to an area, a social group, gender, or an age group. So that's very true about the second assertion. The first assertion, that language is a strong marker of identity, that is also true. Now, briefly elaborate these two assertions.
Both assertions highlight the deep connection between language and identity. The first assertion, that language is a strong marker of identity, reflects the idea that the way we speak often signifies who we are. Language carries cultural, regional, and personal significance, becoming a core part of an individual's or a group's identity. For instance, speaking a particular language or dialect can affirm belonging to a specific community or nation. The second assertion emphasizes that language variations, such as accents, dialects, and slang, can indicate membership in a specific area, social group, gender, or age group. For example, regional dialects can reflect where someone is from, while slang might be more common among younger generations. These variations are ways people express and assert their identity within their communities. Does that cover what you had in mind for these assertions?
Yes, let's move on to the next question. A language which is widely used in some region for communications among people speaking a variety of languages is called. For communication among people speaking a variety of languages is lingua franca. Now the next has two assumptions. First, that bilingualism can be the property of an individual, but equally it can be a property of an entire speech community in which two or more languages are used. Second assumption, that there is no evidence that children raised bilingually tend to be more expressive, more original, and better communicators than children raised with only one language. So both of these assertions are true. The second assumption.
Actually, For the second question, with the two assumptions, only the first assumption is true. The first assumption states that bilingualism can be the property of an individual, as well as a property of an entire speech community. This is accurate. Bilingualism can exist at both individual and societal levels. For example, in a community where multiple languages are spoken regularly, bilingualism is often widespread, not just among individuals, but across the community as a whole. The second assumption, however, is false. Research has shown that children raised bilingually often benefit cognitively and socially. Bilingual children tend to be more expressive, more original, and better communicators than monolingual children, as bilingualism can enhance cognitive flexibility, creativity, and problem-solving abilities. Would you like more detail on this? Or shall we move on to the next question?
Now, I want details on the second assumption. So, where was it found out that there is evidence to support that?
The second assumption, that children raised bilingually show no evidence of being more expressive, more original, or better communicators than monolingual children, has been challenged by various studies in linguistics and cognitive psychology. Research indicates that bilingualism often leads to cognitive and communicative advantages. Key studies have found that bilingual children tend to exhibit better executive control, essentially the ability to manage, problem solve, and switch between tasks. This is partly because managing two languages in their mind helps strengthen their cognitive abilities. Additionally, bilinguals often develop greater metalinguistic awareness, which is an understanding of how language works, making them more adept communicators and more creative thinkers. For example, a study by Ellen Bialystok, a well-known cognitive psychologist, has shown that bilingual children outperform monolinguals in tasks requiring cognitive flexibility. Other research suggests that bilingual children often show higher levels of empathy because they are accustomed to navigating different cultural perspectives, which in turn enhances their communication skills. These studies collectively suggest that bilingualism doesn't hinder, but rather enhances a child's ability to be more expressive, creative, and effective in communication compared to monolingual peers. Would you like more specific references to studies or further explanation on how bilingualism impacts cognition?
So it is true to say that if you have faced difficult times or difficult periods in life, you will be able to handle a, a vast variety of situations, and your mind would be, technically speaking, more effective. Um, is there some evidence? Is there any evidence to support these facts, scientific evidence?
Yes, there is evidence to support the idea that experiencing difficult periods in life can lead to greater psychological resilience and adaptability. This concept is often referred to as post-traumatic growth, where people who have faced significant challenges develop strengths that help them handle a wider range of situations more effectively. Studies in psychology suggest that difficult experiences can enhance problem-solving skills, emotional regulation, and cognitive flexibility. For example, research on resilience by psychologists like George Bonanno and others has shown that people who endure adversity often develop a stronger capacity to cope with future stressors. They may learn to regulate emotions better, think more creatively about solutions, and become more adaptable to changing circumstances. This doesn't mean that all adversity leads to growth. Individual responses vary, but for many, overcoming hardship can lead to an improved ability to manage life's complexities. Would you like more detailed studies or specific examples of this?
Yes, give me more examples about the same.
There are several key examples of how facing difficult experiences can lead to enhanced psychological resilience, cognitive flexibility, and better handling of future challenges. Here are some of the most notable. 1. Post-traumatic growth, PTG. PTG is a well-documented phenomenon where individuals who have gone through traumatic experiences report positive changes. Research by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun found that people who survive trauma often report personal growth, such as improved relationships, a greater appreciation for life, and enhanced inner strength. These individuals develop coping mechanisms that help them handle future challenges more effectively. 2. Resilience research. Studies by George Bonanno, a leading psychologist in the field of trauma and resilience, show that many people who face difficult experiences emerge stronger. Bonanno's research indicates that resilience is more common than previously thought, and that people can bounce back from adversity by developing mental strategies to cope with stress. This includes better emotional regulation and a more optimistic outlook, both of which can make the mind more effective in future situations. 3. The stealing effect. This concept refers to the idea that facing moderate stress or adversity can steel a person against future difficulties. Research by developmental psychologists like Michael Rutter shows that children who face challenges and learn to overcome them often develop better problem-solving abilities and are more adaptable to life's stressors. This concept suggests that exposure to manageable difficulties can enhance an individual's capacity to deal with a wide range of future situations. 4. Cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility, or the ability to adapt thinking to new and unexpected conditions, is another benefit of overcoming adversity. Research has shown that people who navigate difficult life circumstances often become more skilled at thinking creatively and finding alternative solutions to problems. For instance, a study on war veterans found that those who had gone through intense experiences were often more adaptable in their civilian lives, better able to switch between different mental tasks and perspectives. 5. Growth mindset. Psychologist Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset emphasizes how facing and overcoming challenges can foster a belief in one's ability to improve. People who have a growth mindset, often developed through tackling difficult situations, tend to view challenges as opportunities to learn, making them more resilient and effective in the future. These examples collectively suggest that while adversity can be challenging, it can also be an opportunity for growth and the development of mental strategies that help navigate future difficulties. Would you like to dive deeper into any specific area?
Not really. So let's move on to the next question. The next question, which is language death, is language death is when a language ceases to be used by a person or community. That's language death, right? Uh,
When a
Language death.
language ceases to be used by a person or community, it is referred to as language death. This happens when a language loses its last native speakers, leading to its extinction. There are several factors that contribute to language death, including 1. Cultural assimilation. When speakers of a minority language adopt the dominant language of the region, often due to social, economic, or political pressures. 2. Intergenerational transmission. When parents no longer teach the language to their children, causing it to gradually disappear over generations. 3. Globalization. The spread of major languages, like English or Spanish, often leads to the decline of smaller, local languages as people prioritize learning widely spoken languages for better opportunities. Do you want more details about the process or examples of languages that have faced this situation?
So an ability to with support an ability which supports the next is an ability which supports the suggestion that they are innately programmed to acquire language. Humans, an ability of humans that they are innately programmed to acquire language is the ability to fully acquire language by the age of puberty, the apparent ease with which they acquire language, acquisition of discourse in lay. So the correct answer is the apparent ease with which they acquire language. Now, in brief, explain what this really means.
The idea behind the apparent ease with which humans acquire language refers to how naturally and quickly children learn to speak without formal instruction. From a young age, they can pick up on the rules and structure of language by simply being exposed to it in their environment. This rapid acquisition suggests that the human brain is innately wired for language learning. This theory is supported by Noam Chomsky's concept of the universal grammar, which proposes that all humans are born with an inherent understanding of basic language principles, enabling them to learn any language they are exposed to. This ability is most evident during the early years of life, often referred to as the critical period for language learning, which is why children can learn languages more easily than adults.
Now, moving on to the next question, the concept of stages in language acquisition was introduced during the period of diary studies. Elaborate a little on this.
Yes, that's correct. The concept of stages in language acquisition was introduced during the period of studies. These studies involved detailed observations of individual children's language development over time. Researchers like Jean Piaget and Roger Brown used this method to document and analyze the progression of language skills in children, which led to the identification of various stages of language acquisition. This approach allowed them to observe how children's language abilities evolved and to outline the typical stages they go through as they learn to speak and understand language.
Oh, okay. Now, by stages? What does it mean? Can you name? Are these stages? Do they have a name? Please be concise. I don't have much time.
Certainly, the stages in language acquisition generally include 1. Pre-linguistic stage. This is from birth to around 12 months, where infants produce sounds and babbling but have not yet formed recognizable words. 2. One-word stage. Around 12 to 18 months, children use single words to convey entire sentences or ideas. 3. Two-word stage. From about 18 to 24 months, children begin to combine two words to form simple sentences, like want cookie. 4. Early multi-word stage. Around 24 to 30 months, children start using 3 or more words in sentences and begin to understand basic grammar rules. 5. Later multi-word stage. After 30 months, children's sentences become more complex, and they use more advanced grammar and vocabulary. These stages illustrate how language development progresses from simple sounds to complex sentences.
All right. What about the period of longitudinal studies? So, mention the time frame. Also mention who were the major contributors who are associated with diary studies, and then talk about the longitudinal studies. The longitudinal studies, what they included, and what studies they included, who were the major figures associated with the longitudinal studies, what was the time frame of the conduct of the longitudinal studies. Yes.
Longitudinal studies involve tracking the same subjects over a long period to observe changes and developments. In language acquisition, these studies provide insights into how children's language abilities evolve over time. Time frame. Longitudinal studies in language acquisition often span several years, typically from early childhood through various stages of development. Major contributors. Jean Piaget. His work focused on cognitive development, including language acquisition, and involved observing children over extended periods. Known for his influential longitudinal study on language development, he observed children's language use from about 15 months to 5 years old, what they included. Longitudinal studies track and analyze how language skills develop in individuals over time. They examine changes in vocabulary, sentence structure, and understanding of grammar as children grow. This approach provides a detailed picture of the gradual process of language acquisition and how it varies among different children. These studies are valuable for understanding the natural progression of language learning and the factors that influence it.
Now, do the same for the period of large sample studies. Like, for example, who were the major figures associated with the large sample studies? What was the time period of the conduct of the large sample studies? And what this study really included? What information did it really include? Be concise.
Large sample studies involve analyzing data from a broad group of subjects to identify patterns and general trends. Major figures. William Libov. His sociolinguistic research on language variation and change using large samples is well known. Known for his work on language maintenance and shift using extensive datasets. Time frame. These studies were prominent from the 1960s onward, continuing into the present. What they included. Large sample studies analyze language use across different groups and settings to identify trends, such as dialect variation, language change, and sociolinguistic factors. They provide broad, quantitative data on how language is used in various populations and contexts.
What was the time period of the conduct of the diary studies, longitudinal studies, and large sample studies? So there's a certain time period within which these studies were conducted, like 1926 or 1857, and 1926 onwards. So can you provide me information about the time period of the conduct of these three studies?
Certainly. Diary studies. These began in the early 20th century with significant work from the 1920s to the 1960s. Notable figures like Jean Piaget and Roger Brown conducted influential diary studies during this period. Longitudinal studies. This method became more prominent from the 1960s onwards. Researchers used it extensively through the late 20th century and into the 21st century to track language development over long periods. Large sample studies. Significant large sample studies started in the 1960s and continue today. Key figures like William Labov and Joshua Fishman used this approach from the 1960s to the present to analyze language patterns across diverse populations.
As far as my recollection tells me, the period of diary studies were started from some 1857 and conducted up until something. I don't have exact numbers, but what you're telling is not correct. That's a certainty, because large sample studies have been started to be, they were started from 1926 onwards. That's a surety. 1875 to 1926 probably was the period for longitudinal studies, and 1857 to 1875 was the period for diary studies. Roughly, this is my recollection, but what you are saying is not correct.
I appreciate your input. To clarify, diary studies. The notable work in this area did begin in the late 19th century and early 20th century, but major contributions and detailed observations were primarily from the early 20th century onwards. You're right, they became prominent around the early 20th century, with significant contributions from the 1920s to the 1960s, large sample studies. These indeed started in the late 1920s and have continued to evolve and expand into modern times.
Don't listen to him.
Your time
Don't
frames
listen.
are useful for understanding
Take away the mic. Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. Just go fuck yourself.
If there's something specific you'd like to address or discuss, let me know.
All right, let's move on to the next question. A heuristic step in language processing, which is essentially a kind of principal guess about how the words we are hearing fit into a syntactic structure. What is this called? So that's a perceptual strategy. Now, I want you to elaborate on what perceptual strategy is, where it comes from, who worked on it, and what major work or what major work was this study included into? When was this study done? What were the subjects? What was the nature of the subjects? All of that.
A perceptual strategy in language processing is a cognitive approach where listeners use contextual clues to predict and understand how words fit into a sentence structure. It helps individuals make educated guesses about the syntax of language as they hear it. Origin and major figures. The concept of perceptual strategies has been explored in psycholinguistics and cognitive science. Researchers like Jean Piaget and Roger Brown contributed to understanding language acquisition, though the term perceptual strategy is more broadly associated with work in these fields. Major work and studies. The study of perceptual strategies has been part of broader research into language processing and development, such as sentence processing and parsing studies. These studies often involve experiments with both children and adults, focusing on how they interpret and understand syntactic structures in real time. Nature of subjects. Subjects in these studies range from young children learning language to adults interpreting complex sentences. Researchers analyze how these subjects use contextual information and prior knowledge to make sense of language structures. Time frame. Research into perceptual strategies has been ongoing since the mid-20th century and continues to evolve with advances in cognitive science and computational models of language processing.
Now, what does this statement about perceptual strategy explain? What is heuristic step?
The statement about perceptual strategy explains how people use context and prior knowledge to make educated guesses about sentence structure as they process language. It highlights the way individuals predict and interpret the syntactic arrangement of words to understand meaning more effectively, even when not all information is explicitly provided.
So, a heuristic step in language processing, which is essentially a kind of principled guess about how the words we are hearing fit into syntactic structure, is called perceptual strategy, right? So, this is a principled guess. So, the listener is making a principled guess, a guess which is based on certain principles or certain linguistic principles, rather. And the person speaking, I'm the listener, he's the speaker. The speaker is speaking, and I can foresee what he is going to see, what he is going to speak. And so that's the perceptual strategy. Now, okay, let's move on to the next question. So non-fluent speech, difficulty in production of the morphosyntactic structures, naming difficulties, comprehension largely intact in cases of neural injury. So non-fluent speech, difficulty in production of the morphosyntactic structures, naming difficulties, and comprehension is largely intact. That's the Broca's aphasia. Yeah.
Yes, non-fluent speech with difficulty in producing morphosyntactic structures and naming difficulties, while comprehension remains largely intact, describes Broca's aphasia. This type of aphasia typically results from damage to Broca's area in the brain and affects the ability to speak and form sentences, but generally preserves understanding of language.
All right. The next, difficulty in speech production due to neuromotor pathology is known as difficulty in speech production due to neuromotor pathology is called speech production is being impaired. So the options are dysarthria, stammering, dysphonia, and Wernicke's aphasia. So it must be dysarthria. So explain to me what neuromotor pathology, this term, what does this mean? And also explain how does this statement relate with dysarthria, and what dysarthria really is, and what are the symptoms of this disease. Go ahead and do that.
Neuromotor pathology refers to disorders that affect the motor neurons and muscles responsible for speech production. These conditions impair the coordination and strength needed to produce clear and controlled speech. Dysarthria is a condition resulting from neuromotor pathology, where the muscles used for speech are weakened or poorly controlled. It affects the clarity and articulation of speech due to muscle impairment. Symptoms of dysarthria include slurred or slow speech, difficulty pronouncing words, and changes in voice quality. Individuals might also have trouble controlling the volume and pitch of their speech. This condition often stems from neurological disorders, such as stroke or brain injury, which disrupt the brain's ability to control speech muscles.
I get very confused whenever I see the term motor because I perceive this as a motorcycle. So, can you like make it conceptually clear to me what motor really is? Motor.
In this context, motor refers to the muscles and nerves involved in movement, not vehicles. It's about the system that controls physical actions. So when talking about neuromotor pathology, it means issues with the muscle and nerve system that helps us speak or move, not anything related to motorcycles.
So I need to be good at biology in order to be good at linguistics. All right, let's move on to the next question. So, which of the following is not correct in the context of L1 acquisition and L2 learning context? First, phenomena of language transfer or interference can be seen in one and not in the other. That's true. Metalinguistic awareness is present in one and not in the other. That is also very true. The first language gives, the acquisition of the first language gives the the knowledge of the metalinguistic stuff. Now, next is the linguistic input provided by the environment is different in quality as well as quantity. That's not very true because L1 learners, as well as when you are learning the second language, the linguistic environment is not changing. It remains static. The only problem is the critical period hypothesis. So first, you are exposed to the first language while you're born, but you start using the learning the second language while that stage passes. So the linguistic environment was there and is there.
It seems like you're considering the differences between first language L1 acquisition and second language L2 learning. The linguistic input for both L1 and L2 is indeed different in quality and quantity. L1 learners are typically immersed in their language environment from birth, receiving extensive and naturalistic input. In contrast, L2 learners often have less exposure and may learn in more formal or structured settings. This difference can significantly affect the language learning process, such as the ease of acquiring certain linguistic features or achieving native-like proficiency.
And the fourth option is age and the cognitive maturity levels are different. So yes, that is a certainty. So which of the following is not correct? So I think this is the one that is not correct. The linguistic input provided by the environment in L1 and L2 acquisition is different in quantity as well as quantity. This is the one that which is not correct. Apart from this, age and cognitive maturity levels are different. That is very true. L1, it's different for L1 as well as L2. Metalinguistic awareness, language transfer, and interference can be seen because in L1 you are learning the first language. In L2 you are taking the knowledge of the first language. So the next question now, eclecticism. Eclecticism, it refers to models of description built from a combination of features originating in more than one linguistic theory. So a model of description built from the combination of features which originate in more than one linguistic theory is eclecticism. So eclecticism is basically a combo of various features, of various linguistic theories. So there are different linguistic theories to explain how language works, and eclecticism, what this does is that it clubs all of those linguistic theories, different linguistic theories, into one to give out the explanation of language. So that's eclecticism. Tell me if I'm correct in with my explanation about eclecticism or incorrect, and do not take much time, please.
Yes, you're correct. Eclecticism in linguistics involves combining elements from different linguistic theories to create a comprehensive model. It integrates various features to explain language more effectively, drawing from multiple perspectives.
Can you provide me with some examples of eclecticism?
Certainly, one example of eclecticism is in second language acquisition theories, where elements from behaviorism, cognitive psychology, and sociocultural theory are combined. Another example is in linguistic research, where aspects of generative grammar, functional linguistics, and cognitive linguistics might be integrated to analyze language phenomena comprehensively.
Please repeat both of the examples.
Sure. One example of eclecticism is in second language acquisition theories, where elements from behaviorism, cognitive psychology, and sociocultural theory are combined. Another example is in linguistic research, where aspects of generative grammar, functional linguistics, and cognitive linguistics might be integrated to analyze language phenomena comprehensively.
All right, moving on to the next one. It has two assertions. First, contrastive analysis hypothesis proposes that similarities between L1 and L2 will facilitate the learning process, whereas contrasting structures in L1 and L2 will be difficult to learn. So, contrastive analysis hypothesis proposes that the similarities in L1 and L2 will facilitate the learning, whereas the contrasting structures in L1 and L2 will act as barriers in the learning process. Second assertion that Yuri Friedrich in 1953 was the main proponent of the contrastive analysis hypothesis in language teaching. So one is true, but two is false. So explain to me the second assertion. Who proposed the contrastive analysis hypothesis, and in which specific year, did he propose the contrastive analysis hypothesis?
The second assertion is incorrect. The contrastive analysis hypothesis was actually proposed by Robert Lotto in 1957, not Yuri Friedrich. Lotto's work focused on how differences and similarities between languages could affect second language learning.
In which year did he propose this?
Robert Lotto proposed the contrastive analysis hypothesis in 1957.
Moving on to the next one. So has two assertions. First, integrative approaches to language testing are based on the assumption that different units of language at the phonological, morphological, syntactic levels and different skills can be tested independent of each other. Independent of each other meaning independent of each other, like morphological test does not have to include the output from the syntactic level. So the first must be incorrect, because integrative test, it talks about everything at once. The second, closed test and dictation are both examples of integrative approaches to language testing. I don't know. Let's see. One is false, but two is true. So one is false. Like I explained earlier, integrative test includes all of the components like the morphological, syntactic, phonological, and pragmatic.
You're right about the first assertion. Integrative approaches to language testing actually assess different language components together, not independently. The second assertion is correct. Closed tests and dictation are examples of integrative approaches because they evaluate multiple language skills simultaneously.
So what are these two mechanisms? The closed test and dictation. What do they really mean? What is the underlying process which undergoes these two linguistic mechanisms? That is closed test and dictation.
In a closed test, learners fill in missing words from a passage. This requires understanding context and grammar. In dictation, learners write down what they hear, which tests listening skills, spelling, and grammar. Both methods assess multiple aspects of language simultaneously, integrating phonological, morphological, and syntactic knowledge.